It was an early summer morning in a small village house. The curtains danced lightly with the warm breeze, carrying the scent of jasmine and old memories. The room smelled of tea and soap, of someone who kept her home clean not out of duty but out of love. This was Amina's world, peaceful, quiet, and beautifully ordinary. She was in her late 60s, her silver hair tied neatly in a bun. Her eyes still held the glow of a woman who had loved deeply once, but that love, the one everyone in the village believed had lasted a lifetime, was more fragile than it looked. Sound of gentle footsteps. A chair creaks as she sits. Every morning Amina made 2 cups of tea, one for herself and one she placed on the wooden chair across the table. It was her husband's chair, though he had passed away 3 years ago. Sometimes she whispered to it softly. Other times she just looked at the steam rising from the untouched cup, as if waiting for it to carry her words to heaven. Her grandson, Imran, often watched her from the doorway. He loved her, everyone did, but there was something in her eyes that puzzled him, a hidden sadness, a secret maybe. That morning as he prepared to leave for college, he paused. "Daddy, why do you still make 2 cups?" Amina smiled gently, her eyes on the cup. "Because habits don't die with people, Beta." Her voice was calm, but inside a storm moved slowly. One made of memory, guilt, and something she had buried long ago. Sound fades. Gentle violin note enters, soft and emotional. Years ago, Amina had been a young bride in this same house. Her husband, Rafiq, was a good man, hard-working, kind, but distant. He loved her in the way men were taught to love, quietly, with responsibility, not with words. He never said, "I love you," but he made sure the house never lacked anything. And yet Amina had always wanted more, and not more comfort, but more feeling. She longed for warmth in his eyes, a hand that stayed a little longer, a voice that trembled when it said her name. That need, small and unspoken, was where her story began. Sound of distant rain. Pages turning. A man's voice, faint, reciting poetry. It was a rainy afternoon when she first met Saeed, a schoolteacher newly arrived in town. He was different, calm, poetic, with eyes that noticed the little things. When he came to buy vegetables from the market where Amina helped her mother, he smiled, not the polite smile of a stranger, but one that said, "I see you." For weeks, they exchanged small talks and about rain, about books, about how quickly time passes. There was nothing wrong in it, nothing that anyone could call love. But in her heart, Amina felt the quiet stirring of something she hadn't felt in years. Soft heartbeats in the background. The sound of rain grows closer. One day, Saeed lent her a book, a small poetry collection wrapped in brown paper. "It's my favorite," he said. "But be careful, it makes people fall in love with words." Amina laughed nervously. "Then I'll only read half," he smiled. "Then you'll only fall halfway." The words lingered between them like the scent of rain on dry soil. Neither said more, but both understood something had begun. Something dangerous, beautiful, and deeply human. Every page of that book became a letter they never wrote. Every glance in the market became a promise they never spoke. Soft sighs. The faint rustle of paper. The ticking clock returns. Years later, when Amina sat with her tea, she often wondered, was it love or was it just loneliness wearing a sweet disguise? She never crossed the line people fear so much, but she came close enough to know how it feels when your heart betrays your reason. Her husband never knew. Her children never guessed. Only time kept her secret, hiding it beneath wrinkles and silence. But now, as she grew older, she found herself thinking more about Saeed than Rafiq. She could no longer remember her husband's voice clearly, but she could still hear Saeed's laughter in the rain, and that frightened her. Soft sound of wind through curtains. A kettle whistles softly. The music fades to a low hum. That morning, as she looked at the empty chair, Amina whispered, "I'm sorry." She didn't know who she was speaking to, her husband, her younger self, or the man who had once made her heart tremble. Outside, a bird flew past the window. The tea had gone cold, and the story, long buried under silence, was finally waking up. Amina sat by the window, sewing quietly. The sun poured through the lace curtain, painting golden lines on her hands. Outside, the world moved as it always did. Carts rolling, voices calling, the smell of fried snacks from the corner stall. But inside, Her heart carried a rhythm that didn't belong to the house anymore. It had been weeks since she last saw Saeed, the schoolteacher. He had gone to visit his sick mother in another village, and though no one said it aloud, Amina missed him. Not the man, perhaps, but the feeling he brought with him. The feeling of being seen again. Soft sound of a book closing. A distant thunder roll. That afternoon, as clouds gathered above, someone knocked on the wooden door. Amina's hands froze mid-stitch. She knew that knock, gentle 2 taps and a pause. Her heart skipped. When she opened the door, there he was, Saeed, his white kurta damp from the rain, his eyes full of something unspoken. "You look the same," he said softly, stepping under the roof. "And you look like the rain forgot to let you go," she replied, her voice trembling slightly. The faint sound of rain tapping on the roof. The air hums with quiet energy. Saeed placed a small packet on the table. "I brought you something. Your favorite sweets from the city." Amina smiled, pretending not to notice his hand brushing hers. "You remembered?" "I remember everything," he said, his voice low. Silence filled the room. A silence warm enough to make the rain outside sound distant. It was not the silence of strangers, but of 2 souls who understood what words could ruin. Sound of rain softens. Teacups clink. The clock ticks gently. They sat together, sipping tea. The old radio hummed softly in the background, playing an old song about lost love. Amina's fingers trembled slightly as she poured the tea, spilling a few drops. Saeed reached forward to steady her hand. His touch was light, respectful. But in that single second, the whole world changed. Amina looked away quickly, her breath catching. "People will talk," she whispered. "Let them talk," he said. "They don't know what silence feels like." Soft heartbeat sound. The rain fades to a steady rhythm like time slowing down. That evening, Saeed left before anyone could see him. Amina watched him walk down the muddy lane, his umbrella open, his figure fading into the mist. She stood at the door long after he disappeared. Her husband, Rafiq, came home late that night, tired and quiet as usual. He spoke only of the harvest of money of neighbors. Amina nodded, answered when needed, and smiled when expected. But her heart was somewhere else, caught in a look, a voice, a moment she couldn't forget. Sound of dishes being washed. The clinking slows down as the narration turns inward. In the following days, she tried to forget him. She busied herself with chores, washing, cooking, feeding the hens, tending the garden. But every ordinary sound reminded her of him. The rustle of paper like the turning of his book pages. The smell of rain like his arrival, the warmth of tea like his touch. Sometimes, she caught herself humming the old song that played that day, and when she did, she would stop suddenly, almost angry at herself. "Enough, Amina," she'd whisper. "You are a wife, a mother. Stop dreaming." But hearts don't always obey wisdom. Soft sighs, distant wind chime sound. One evening, while walking to the well, she saw him again, standing by the old banyan tree, waiting. Her steps slowed. He didn't call out. He simply smiled, and that same kind, knowing smile. For a moment they stood apart, their eyes speaking what mouths could not. Then he said softly, "Do you ever think about that book I gave you?" She nodded, barely breathing. "It changed me," she whispered. "I read it every night. And what did it teach you?" "That sometimes words can be more dangerous than actions." He looked at her for a long moment. "Then let's speak less and feel more." Her eyes widened, not in fear but in understanding. Gentle wind sound. Distant thunder rolls again. A heartbeat fades in slowly. That night, Amina could not sleep. Rafiq's breathing beside her was steady, like always, but she felt oceans away. In the dark, she imagined Saeed's face, his voice saying her name softly as if it was something sacred. Her chest ached, not from guilt yet, but from the ache of something that felt alive again after years of silence. Clock ticks loudly. The sound of the fan hums, then silence. At dawn, Amina stood by the window watching the first light of morning touch the fields. She knew she was standing at the edge of something, a choice that could change everything. And even though she tried to turn away, a part of her heart whispered, maybe love doesn't ask permission. It just arrives. Soft violin music begins. The sound of rain returns gently, then fades into the sound of tea pouring, slow and calm. The next morning, she found a folded note slipped under her door. No name. Just 2 lines written in neat handwriting. If hearts could whisper, yours would already know mine. Her hand trembled as she read it. And with that, the quiet began to crumble. Fade out. Sound of a door slowly closing. The wind sighs through the curtains, end with one deep heartbeat. The rain had become Amina's secret friend. Whenever it poured, she knew he would come. Not always with words, sometimes just with silence, with the warmth of eyes that understood too much. Saeed never knocked loudly. He always tapped twice, the same way he did the first time. It was a sound Amina had begun to wait for, even when she told herself she shouldn't. That evening, the sky was gray, heavy with clouds. Amina sat by the window pretending to read a book, but her eyes hadn't moved from the same page in an hour. When the knock finally came, soft, careful, her heart stumbled. Sound of slow footsteps, the soft creak of a wooden door opening. He stood there, raincoat dripping, his smile gentle. "I told myself I wouldn't come," he said. But then the rain started. Amina looked at him quietly. "And what does the rain remind you of?" He took a step closer. "You." Soft music swells on a blend of piano and rain sounds. A kettle whistles faintly in the background. Inside, the house was dim. The oil lamp on the table flickered like a heartbeat. Amina poured him tea, the same way she always did, careful, steady, pretending her hands weren't shaking. He sat across from her, and for a moment they just listened, to the rain, to the clock, to the silence between their breaths. "You shouldn't come here," she whispered. "I know. Then why do you?" "Because your eyes ask me to." Amina looked away. The tea was getting cold again. She wanted to say something, to stop this before it became what she feared, but the words would not come. Sound of wind brushing against curtains. A low hum in the air. There was a small scar on Saeed's hand. She noticed it that night as he reached for the teacup. "How did you get that?" she asked softly. He smiled. "A long time ago. Tried to save a bird caught in wire. The wire cut me." She traced the scar with her eyes, not her fingers. "Did the bird live?" He looked at her for a long moment. "No, but it flew for a while before it died." The words stayed in her heart like a wound that wouldn't heal. That night when he left, she stood in the doorway, her cerise brushing against the cold air, the rain whispering secrets that only the lonely can hear. Sound of door closing slowly. The rain fades into a quiet hum. The narrator's tone softens, days passed. Amina tried to go back to normal life, cooking, cleaning, talking to her husband, smiling at neighbors. But everything began to feel rehearsed, like a play she no longer believed in. At night, she heard echoes of Saeed's voice in the dark, not his words, but the silence that followed them. She told herself what she felt was wrong, but she also told herself that wrong things sometimes come dressed as kindness. Soft rustle of letters. Pages turning. A week later, another note arrived under her door. This time it said, "I have no right to miss you, but I do." She hid the note inside the poetry book he had given her, between 2 pages that spoke about longing and sin. Every night she opened that page, ran her fingers over the words, and closed it again, as if trying to lock her feelings inside. But hearts don't stay locked forever. The sound of a heartbeat grows faintly under the narration. A quiet melody plays, unfragile, emotional. One afternoon she saw him in the marketplace. He didn't approach her, he only looked. But that look was enough to make her forget where she was. She dropped the basket she was carrying. Apples rolled across the dirt road. Saeed bent down to pick them up, their hands brushing briefly. Too brief, too dangerous. A woman nearby noticed and smiled knowingly. "You two seem close," she said teasingly. Amina froze. "No, he's just a teacher." But her cheeks burned. And that night she couldn't sleep. Sound of crickets outside. The night breeze hummed softly. In the days that followed, guilt became her new shadow. She started avoiding him. She didn't go to the market when he did. She stayed home more often. But no matter how hard she tried, every sound reminded her of him. The knock of rain, the laughter of children, the whisper of wind through leaves. Sometimes, she thought she heard his voice outside her window. Sometimes she dreamed of walking away with him, barefoot in the rain. But when she woke, her husband was there, snoring gently, loyal, unaware. The contrast tore her apart. the sound of a deep sigh. A low cello note plays softly. One morning, Amina found her husband standing by the window holding the poetry book. "Where did you get this?" he asked casually. She froze. Her mouth went dry. "It's old," she managed. "Someone left it at the shop." He nodded, not questioning further, but his eyes lingered. Suspicious, maybe, or just curious. When he left for work, Amina sat on the bed, shaking. She realized how close she was to being caught, not in an act, but in a feeling. And feelings sometimes can ruin everything. Rain returns softly. A single violin plays in the background and slow, mournful. That evening she went to the riverbank alone. The sky was heavy with clouds again. She watched the water flow, restless, endless, and thought of all the words she could never say. She whispered into the wind, "Forgive me, whoever you are listening." But there was no answer, only the soft whisper of the rain, carrying away the echoes of her heart. The soundscape fades, footsteps walking away, a faint heartbeat, then only rain. Fade out slowly. The next few days passed in a strange silence. Amina moved around the house like a shadow, speaking softly, smiling when she had to, but her heart was no longer where her hands were. She swept the floor, boiled tea, and folded clothes, but her thoughts stayed far away, by the river, by the memory of rain, by the sound of a voice that said her name differently from anyone else. She wished she could forget Saeed, but forgetting him was like trying to stop the sky from raining. At night, when the house slept, she would sit by the old lamp and read from the poetry book again. Her fingers traced every word like it was a wound she didn't want to heal. Sometimes she whispered his name under her breath, so softly even the walls wouldn't hear, and then she would close the book, press it to her chest, and pray that morning would never come. But morning always came, and with it came guilt. One morning her husband Rafiq looked at her differently. He noticed the faraway look in her eyes, the way she paused when someone mentioned the school or the market. He didn't ask questions, but Amina saw the doubt forming like a storm behind his silence. He had always been quiet, but now his quietness felt heavier, sharper. When she served him breakfast, his hand brushed hers. Once that touch meant safety. Now it only reminded her of distance. She looked at him, his tired eyes, his rough hands, his steady heart, and wondered when she had stopped seeing him. Later that afternoon, she went to the backyard to collect laundry when she saw Saeed standing near the corner of the old wall. Her breath caught. She looked around quickly to make sure no one was watching. "What are you doing here?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "I needed to see you," he said softly. "It's been too long." "It's dangerous," she replied. "People talk. Let them. You're the only truth I know." Amina's heart ached. She wanted to tell him to leave, to forget her. But when he stepped closer, his eyes full of warmth and sorrow, her words vanished. He reached into his pocket and handed her a small folded paper. "I wrote something for you," he said. She took it with shaking hands. Their fingers brushed, and for a moment everything around them disappeared. The noise, the fear, the world. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, she opened the note under the dim light. It said, "Some love is not meant to be lived, only remembered." She read it again and again until the ink blurred through her tears. The next morning, she woke to whispers in the kitchen. Her neighbor Nasima was talking to Rafiq in a low voice. Amina heard her name, heard the word teacher, and her stomach turned cold. She stood frozen by the door. When she walked in, both fell silent. Rafiq avoided her eyes. Nasima smiled too quickly and left soon after, leaving behind the bitter smell of gossip. For the rest of the day, Amina's heart raced with fear. Every knock at the door made her jump. Every look from Rafiq felt like a question she couldn't answer. That evening, he sat by the table longer than usual, staring at his tea. Finally, he spoke. "People talk strange things these days," he said quietly. "About you. About the teacher." Amina's throat went dry. "People always talk," she said softly. "They have no work." Rafiq looked at her, his eyes searching. "Is it true?" She couldn't breathe. She wanted to say no, to shout, to cry, but the words tangled in her throat. She saw the hurt in his eyes, the disbelief fighting with trust, and she hated herself for both what she had done and what she hadn't. "No," she whispered finally. "It's not true." Rafiq said nothing. He only nodded once, then stood up and left the room. His footsteps echoed down the hall, and when the door shut behind him, Amina felt something inside her crumble. Days turned into weeks. Saeed stopped coming. The notes stopped too. Maybe he had heard the whispers. Maybe he knew it was over. Amina tried to convince herself it was better that way. But her heart, foolish and stubborn, still waited for him every time it rained. One afternoon, while she was hanging clothes, she saw him from afar walking toward the edge of the village. He looked back once, his eyes meeting hers across the distance. It was a look full of goodbye, and she knew, without words, without sound, that she would never see him again. That night, Amina cried for the first time in years. Not loud, not wild, just quiet tears falling into her hands. She wasn't crying for love lost. She was crying for the woman she used to be, and the one she had become. When morning came, she sat on the porch watching the sun rise. The village looked peaceful again, as if nothing had ever happened. But inside her, the silence was loud. She picked up the old poetry book and opened it to the last page. There, hidden beneath a corner of the cover, was the note he had written. She touched it gently, then tore it in half. The pieces fluttered down to the ground like dead petals. For the first time in months, she felt the air move freely in her chest. It hurt, but it also felt like truth. She looked up at the sky and whispered, "Maybe this is how love ends, not with anger, not with shame, but with a quiet letting go." The day went on. Rafiq spoke to her that evening, not of forgiveness, but of dinner, of routine, of normal things. Maybe that was his way of saying he still wanted to try. Amina smiled faintly, poured his tea, and watched the steam rise. The house smelled of rain again, and for the first time, she didn't look toward the door. She only looked at the man who had always stayed. The monsoon ended, leaving behind the faint smell of wet earth and broken dreams. The air had changed. It carried no more rain, only memories that refused to dry. Amina walked through her small garden, her bare feet brushing against the damp soil. The flowers had begun to wilt, and she thought in a way she understood them. They bloomed beautifully once, but too much rain had made their roots weak. Rafiq sat on the porch fixing an old chair. He barely spoke these days. His silence wasn't sharp like before. It was heavy, tired, like a man who had accepted that some questions will never have answers. Amina wanted to talk to him, to say something, anything, but every time she tried, her words died in her throat. The village seemed to have forgotten the whispers, or maybe it had just moved on to new gossip. But for Amina, every passing face still felt like a mirror, reflecting the truth she tried to hide. The shame no longer burned. It simply lived inside her quietly, like an ache that had learned to stay. One afternoon, Amina was washing clothes by the well when her neighbor Nasima approached her again. "It's been a while since I saw the teacher," Nasima said casually, her tone light but her eyes sharp. "He's gone back to his hometown," Amina replied calmly. Nasima smiled faintly. "Maybe that's for the best. People talk less when there's no one left to talk about." Amina didn't answer. She kept washing, her hands moving in rhythm with the sound of water, but her mind drifted far away. That night, when everyone had gone to sleep, Amina opened the window and looked at the stars. She wondered where Saeed was now. Did he still think of her? Did he regret anything? Or had he forgotten her completely, as if she were just another passing chapter in his life? She wanted to believe he remembered, but part of her hoped he didn't. It would be easier that way. The next morning, Rafiq woke early. Amina heard him moving around quietly, as if trying not to disturb her. He had grown older in these past months, his hair grayer, his shoulders slightly bent. She watched him pack his bag for work and suddenly realized how much he had given, without ever asking for anything. When he noticed her watching, he smiled faintly. "The fields need me early today," he said. She nodded. "Be careful on the road. It's still muddy." He nodded again, and for a moment something softened in his eyes, something she hadn't seen in years. "You should rest more, Amina," he said gently before leaving. After he was gone, Amina sat in silence. The sound of his footsteps faded, but his words stayed. There was kindness in them, and guilt mixed with gratitude filled her heart. Later that day, a letter arrived from the postman. The envelope had Saeed's handwriting. Her hands shook as she took it, but she didn't open it right away. She waited until the house was empty, then sat by the window and unfolded it slowly. The letter was short. "I am leaving for another city. I wanted to say goodbye properly this time. You once told me that some love is not meant to be lived. You were right. But I will carry the sound of your silence with me always. Be well, Amina. She read it 3 times. Then she folded it neatly and placed it inside the book again, where the other notes once lived. There were no tears, no trembling, just a quiet acceptance. His words felt like the final line of a poem she had been living for too long. That evening, she cooked Rafiq's favorite dish. When he came home, the table was set neatly, candles lit though the electricity was working fine. He looked surprised. What's the occasion? Nothing, she said softly. I just wanted to sit with you today. They ate together in silence at first, but the silence wasn't cold anymore. After a while, Rafiq began to speak about the fields, about how the crops were growing well this season. Amina listened, nodding, adding small words here and there. The sound of his voice felt like comfort returning to the walls of the house. When he finished, she looked at him and said quietly, You've always been kind to me. I haven't said thank you in a long time. Rafiq looked puzzled. There's no need for that. There is, she insisted. You stayed even when things weren't easy. He didn't reply. He only reached out, placing his hand gently over hers. His touch was warm, forgiving in its own quiet way. That night, when she lay beside him, Amina didn't think of Saeed. She thought of the man beside her, the one who never wrote poetry, never spoke grand words, but had loved her in a way that lasted. She turned toward him and whispered softly, Thank you. He didn't wake, but his hand moved slightly, finding hers in the dark. Days passed, and Amina began to live differently. She found peace in small things, the smell of cardamom in her tea, the laughter of children outside, the warmth of morning sunlight through the window. She started visiting the mosque again, not out of fear or guilt, but to quiet her heart. Sometimes when it rained, she still felt the old ache, but it no longer hurt the same way. It had turned into something softer, a memory she could hold without breaking. She had loved, she had sinned, she had survived, and now she was learning to forgive herself. One evening she walked to the riverbank where she and Saeed had last met. The water glimmered in the fading light. She picked up a small pebble and threw it in, watching the ripples spread. Goodbye, she whispered. The wind carried her words away, and for the first time in a long time she felt light. She turned back toward her home, where the lamps were already glowing warmly through the windows. Rafiq was waiting inside. Amina smiled as she walked back, her step steady, her heart finally quiet. The rain began to fall again, soft and gentle, not as a reminder, but as a blessing. The years began to slip by quietly, as if time itself wanted to help Amina forget. The house grew older with her, its walls carrying laughter and silence in equal measure. The children had moved away. The rooms that once echoed with noise now held only memories and the slow ticking of the clock. But peace, after all the storms, had returned. It came not with joy or excitement, but with stillness, like the calm after rain. Every morning Amina still woke early. She made tea for 2, though now it was a habit more than hope. She placed 1 cup across the table where Rafiq sat reading the newspaper. They had fallen into a rhythm again, not of passion, but of companionship. There was a quiet kindness in the way he asked for more sugar, or the way she folded his scarf before he left for work. It wasn't love as young hearts imagined it. It was love that had survived everything. Sometimes when she looked at Rafiq's face, she saw not the man he was, but the man who had stayed. And that, she realized, was enough. One afternoon, while sorting through old clothes, she found the poetry book again. It had been years since she last opened it. Dust covered the cover, the pages yellowed with age. She turned the first few pages, expecting pain to return, but instead she felt only a gentle ache, like remembering a song she once loved. There was one letter still inside, folded carefully. She opened it and read Saeed's handwriting again. The words had faded slightly, but their meaning hadn't. She smiled faintly, whispering, "You've done your part. It's my turn now." That evening, she decided to do something she hadn't done in a long time. She dressed neatly, put on her favorite shawl, and walked to the mosque. The path was familiar, yet every step felt new. The children playing on the street greeted her, calling her Amina Dadi, and she smiled back. For the first time, she didn't feel haunted by the past. She felt grateful for the journey that brought her here. Inside the mosque courtyard, she sat quietly after prayer, watching the sky change colors. A group of women nearby whispered softly about their families, their joys, their worries. Amina listened and realized something beautiful. Life goes on no matter what it takes away. When she returned home, Rafiq was sitting by the fire, reading again. She placed her hand gently on his shoulder. He looked up, surprised. "Everything all right?" he asked. "Yes," she said softly. "For the first time, it truly is." He smiled, nodding, and went back to his paper. But that night, when he turned off the lamp, he reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. They lay there in the dark, two souls who had weathered too much yet found their way back to peace. As months turned into years, Amina grew older, slower. Her hair turned white, her hands frail. But her eyes, those same eyes that once held storms, now held calm seas. The past no longer hurt. It had become a quiet teacher. Sometimes her grandson Imran visited. He was grown now, studying in the city. He loved listening to her stories, the way she spoke about her youth. One evening he asked, "Dadi, did you ever love someone other than Dada?" Amina froze for a moment. The question was innocent, but it hit deep. She smiled faintly. "Love is a strange thing, Imran. Sometimes it finds you in the wrong season, but still leaves you warm." He frowned, not fully understanding. "So you did?" She looked out the window where rain had begun to fall again, soft and steady. "Maybe," she said quietly. "But some stories are not meant to be told. They're meant to be understood." Imran nodded, sensing her silence meant more than words. He reached for her hand and she squeezed it gently. "One day," she whispered, "you'll understand that love isn't always about holding on. Sometimes it's about letting go and still remembering kindly." That night, after everyone slept, Amina sat by the window again. The rain was falling hard now, echoing against the roof. She closed her eyes and listened. The sound no longer brought pain, it brought peace. She imagined Saeed somewhere far away, maybe old like her, maybe sitting under another sky, remembering her too. She whispered softly, "I forgive you, and myself." The wind outside seemed to sigh in response. The rain softened as if agreeing. She smiled, feeling the heaviness lift from her chest. The next morning she woke early as always. She made 2 cups of tea and waited for Rafiq. But this time his chair stayed empty longer than usual. When she called out his name, there was no answer. She walked into the bedroom and found him still, his face peaceful, a faint smile on his lips. For a long moment she stood there silently. Then she sat beside him, holding his hand, her tears falling gently. "You kept your promise," she whispered. "You stayed till the end." The funeral was simple. The village came, spoke kind words, and left. Amina sat quietly afterward, staring at the empty chair again. It felt different now, not painful but sacred. She poured 2 cups of tea one last time and placed one across from her. "Thank you," she said softly, "for teaching me what love really means." The house fell silent again, but this time it wasn't lonely. It was peaceful. As the evening light filled the room, Amina looked at the poetry book one final time. She tore out the page with Saeed's letter and burned it gently in a small bowl. The ashes rose like tiny gray wings before disappearing into the wind. Then she whispered, "Now both stories are complete." She watched the smoke fade, her eyes calm, her lips curved into a quiet smile. Outside the rain began again, not heavy, not sad but soft, like forgiveness falling from the sky. The house had grown quiet after Rafiq's passing, the kind of quiet that didn't ache but hummed softly, like an old tune remembered by heart. Amina moved through the rooms slower now, her steps careful, her hands trembling slightly as she folded his clothes one last time. The smell of him still lingered in the fabric, the faint scent of tobacco, of rain, of the man who had stayed through every storm. She pressed one of his scarves to her face and closed her eyes, whispering a prayer instead of tears. In the village, people had begun to speak of her differently now. Once she was the woman they whispered about. Now she was the woman they respected. A widow who carried grace like an old shawl, simple and worn but beautiful in its endurance. Time had softened everything, her shame, her guilt, her longing. What was once scandal had turned into quiet legend, half forgotten but never erased. Every evening, Amina lit a small oil lamp and placed it near Rafiq's picture. She didn't talk much these days, but sometimes she would whisper to him as if he were still sitting by her side. "You see, old man," she'd say with a small smile, "I've learned to make tea without burning it now." Then she'd pause, eyes glimmering. "And I think you'd be proud of me for that." Her grandson Imran had started visiting more often. He'd grown into a thoughtful young man, studying literature, drawn to stories and the emotions they carried. Whenever he came, he would sit beside her on the porch, recording her voice on his little phone. "I want to preserve your stories, Daddy," he'd say. "They feel like treasures." She laughed softly. "Some treasures are better left buried, Beta." "But they made you who you are," he insisted. "Yes," she said, looking at the fading sky. "And that's why they should stay in the heart, not on paper." Yet she still told him some, the gentle ones, the safe ones. Stories about her childhood, her marriage, the old village festivals. But there was always one story she never told, one that lived quietly between her breaths. The story of Saeed. One afternoon, while cleaning the shelf, Imran found the old poetry book. He opened it curiously, noticing a few pages missing, and asked, "Daddy, whose handwriting is this?" Amina froze for a moment. Her eyes softened when she saw it. "An old friend," she said simply. "Someone who once taught me the beauty of words." Imran smiled. "Then he taught you well?" She nodded, her gaze distant. "Yes, he did. And he also taught me that beauty can be dangerous if you don't understand it." That night, Amina couldn't sleep. The memory of Saeed returned, not painfully but gently, like a visitor she was finally ready to meet again. She sat by the window looking at the moon. The silver light poured across her wrinkled hands, the same hands that once trembled under the touch of forbidden affection. She smiled faintly. How young she had been, how foolish, and yet how alive. The sound of rain began again, soft at first, then steady. Amina closed her eyes and listened. It had been years, yet every drop carried the echo of that one afternoon when she had met Saeed by the riverbank. She remembered the look in his eyes, the sadness behind his smile, and the last letter he had written. She had burned it, yes, but words once read never really die. She whispered into the night, "I hope you found peace wherever you are." The next morning, she woke with a strange calmness in her heart. She felt lighter, freer. As she prepared breakfast, she noticed the sunlight spilling through the window more brightly than usual. The world outside seemed alive again, the birds louder, the air warmer, the earth forgiving. Later that day, a young postman came by with a small envelope.
"It's for you, Amina Begum," he said, handing it politely.
She frowned. She hadn't received a letter in years. The handwriting was unfamiliar, shaky and uneven. She opened it slowly, and as she read, her eyes filled with disbelief and quiet tears. It was from Saeed's nephew. The letter said Saeed had passed away a few months ago. Among his belongings, they had found a small box labeled for Amina. Inside was a locket with a dried flower and a small note that said, "You were my spring." Amina held the locket in her trembling hands, her vision blurring. She sat down, tears falling silently onto her lap. There was no pain in them, only gratitude. Gratitude that life had allowed her to love, to lose, and to forgive. That evening, when Imran came home, he found her sitting quietly on the porch, the locket in her palm. "Who was he, Daddy?" he asked gently. She looked at him for a long time, her eyes reflecting years of silence. Then she smiled. "Someone I once knew before I learned what love truly meant." Imran didn't ask more. He only sat beside her, holding her hand as the sun went down. The wind carried the faint scent of rain again. Amina closed her eyes, listening to the rhythm of it, the same rhythm that had once changed her life. She whispered softly, almost to herself, "It all ends where it began, in the rain." That night, before going to bed, she placed the locket next to Rafiq's photo. "Now both of you are home," she said quietly. The candle beside the picture flickered as if answering. Amina lay down, the air cool and peaceful around her. She thought about the years, the mistakes, the forgiveness that had followed. She thought about the way love had shaped her, not perfectly, but truthfully. She smiled to herself, whispering the words she once feared to say. "I lived. I truly lived." The rain continued through the night, gentle and forgiving, washing away everything that once hurt. And somewhere in that sound she felt both men, the one who had stayed, and the one who had left, watching over her, both loving her in their own ways. For the first time in her long, complicated life, Amina slept without dreams. Amina's world had grown small but peaceful. The house, once filled with voices and footsteps, now held a soft stillness that wrapped around her like a blanket. Each morning she woke to the sound of birds in the neem tree outside, their songs blending with the slow ticking of the clock. The air smelled faintly of rosewater and old books. It was the scent of a life well lived, of joy and loss woven into quiet acceptance. Her hair was now silver white, her hands thin and trembling, but her heart had grown gentle with age. She spent her mornings by the window, watching the sunlight move across the floor the same way she once watched the rain. Sometimes she spoke softly to Rafiq's photo on the table. Other times she simply smiled to herself, lost in thoughts that no one else could ever understand. Imran had become a writer. His first book, a collection of true love stories, was dedicated to her. It was titled The Woman Who Waited for Rain. When he brought her a copy, Amina ran her fingers over the words with wonder. "You wrote my heart, Beta," she said, her eyes shining. He smiled. "No, Daddy, you lived it. I just listened." In the evenings, he often came to sit beside her. He read her stories, some his own, some borrowed from the world. She listened with the patience of someone who had already seen how all stories end. Sometimes he asked her, "Do you think love ever dies?" And she would answer, "No, it just changes shape." Sometimes it becomes forgiveness. Sometimes it becomes memory. The villagers had long stopped gossiping. They greeted her with warmth, bringing sweets during festivals, asking for her prayers during hard times. They said her eyes carried peace now, that being around her felt like sitting near a calm river. None of them knew her whole story, but they sensed something in her presence, something that spoke of love's pain and its quiet victory. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the fields, Amina decided to visit the river for the first time in years. She walked slowly, leaning on her wooden stick, her shawl fluttering in the wind. The path was the same trees, the same stones, but it felt softer now, like time had forgiven everything. When she reached the riverbank, she sat on the same spot where she once stood with Saeed. The water shimmered under the fading light, calm and endless. She took the small locket from her pocket, the one Saeed's nephew had sent years ago. The dried flower inside had turned to dust. She smiled faintly. "Do you remember," she whispered, "how the rain always came when we met? You were my spring once, but spring doesn't stay. It teaches you to bloom and let go." She looked up at the sky, her eyes full of tears that didn't fall. "I hope you found your peace." "I did." The wind picked up, carrying the faint scent of rain again, though the sky was clear. It brushed through her hair gently, like a hand she once knew. For a moment it felt as if Saeed was there beside her, not in body but in memory. When she returned home, the lamp was still burning by Rafiq's photo. She placed the locket beside it and whispered, "Now both of you are where you belong. In my prayers, not my pain." She poured 2 cups of tea, as she always did, and sat in the golden light of dusk. As night fell, Amina leaned back in her chair, feeling the warmth of the cup between her palms. The air was cool and the sound of crickets filled the room. She thought of her life, all its chapters, its mistakes, its tenderness. She realized that every wrong turn had led her here, to this peace. Her eyes began to close slowly. She wasn't afraid. She felt the world grow lighter, the noise fade into silence. She thought she heard rain outside, but maybe it was only her heart slowing down. With her last soft breath, she whispered, "Love never ends. It just finds a quieter place." In the morning, Imran found her sitting peacefully in her chair, her tea untouched, her face calm, like someone who had fallen asleep in the middle of a prayer. The sunlight touched her gently, making her look almost young again. He sat beside her for a long time, tears rolling down his cheeks. Then he noticed the poetry book on the table, open to a page she must have marked before she closed her eyes. The verse read, "And when the rain returned, she smiled," because she knew this time it had come for peace. Imran closed the book and whispered, "You found it, Dadi." He placed the book beside her hands, then looked out the window. Outside, the rain had begun to fall softly, just as it always did in her story. The world was quiet, forgiving, and full of love, the kind that lives beyond life itself. And somewhere, in that gentle rhythm of the rain, Amina's story finally rested. No longer a secret, no longer a sorrow, but a memory that would live on in the hearts of those who listened.